Some products that we review do special things that are almost immediately obvious in a controlled environment like we use for testing. Some products also present a challenge to our preconceived notions of what works in audio. The Esoteric F-01 integrated amp does both. Let's take a look. Okay, here's the conundrum presented by the Esoteric F-01 integrated amp. It's a 30 watt per channel amplifier that uses pure Class A circuitry, and it costs $20,000. For those of you who like to shop by the pound, that's going to be a non-starter. Got it. But even for those of you who are willing to consider different feature sets and prices that yield different value propositions, 30 watts and $20K might be tough to swallow. It's less tough when you consider that you're getting a power amp and a preamp with switching and moving coil and moving magnet phono capability. Even more, the F-01 does two exceptional things when referenced to the absolute sound. If you value those, the power rating may recede from view. I'll get to the exceptional qualities in a bit, but first let's consider some technical matters. The first technical matter is Class A amplification. What the heck is it? Well, basically, all amplification involves the use of devices, transistors or vacuum tubes, that allow a small input signal from, say, a D to A converter to control a large voltage and current from a power supply, say, from an AC wall outlet. The essential thing for our conversation is that these devices, transistors and tubes, do not behave with perfect linearity. Linearity just means that the output of the device is exactly like the input signal, only bigger. There are various ways to increase linearity, and one of these is a circuit design called Class A. Class A circuits use the most linear operating region of the transistor or tube for the smallest, most delicate, and most common signals. So Class A should be inherently lower distortion. Excellent! Good job! Or, in the immortal words of Daisy Duke,
I totally don't know what that means, but I want it.
Linearity is nice, but it's harder to make these Class A circuits have high output power. So, as with all engineering, there are trade-offs. Now, the Esoteric F-01 provides an interesting study in trade-offs. One reason is that 30 watts per channel is a significant amount of power. Let me explain. Let's start with a group of amplifiers that are known and loved by some audiophiles. 300B tube amps. These often have something like 8 watts output. In relative terms, the Esoteric F-01 can drive speakers to 6 dB higher levels than our example 300B amp, and maybe plus 9 dB with 4 ohm speakers where the F-01 has 60 watts per channel. Or, for the same levels, we can use 6 dB less sensitive speakers. Moving the other direction, amplifiers with 120 watts per channel will yield plus 6 dB more headroom than the F-01. Or you need plus 6 dB sensitivity speakers with the F-01, say 93 dB versus 87 dB. But note, the 30 watts should be able to deliver 102 dB peaks on typical 87 dB efficiency 8 ohm speakers. High-end audio is chock full of low-power artisanal amps and high-power beasts. There aren't as many examples of amps that split the difference. Maybe there should be more. All right. Let's talk about sound quality with that in mind. I came to think this class of amplifier has a useful role to play once I got down to listening. Remember, my job here is to objectively describe, using observation reference to the absolute sound, what you get with a device under test. Your job is to know what sonic qualities you value and what your budget is. For this test, I primarily used the Magico A5 speakers, a Berkeley Audio Alpha DAC Reference Series 3P, Alpha Reference USB, and an Aurender N20 streamer. Cables were from WireWorld and AudioQuest Niagara Power Conditioning. Room treatment was by Ready Acoustics and PSI Audio. The point isn't to impress or disappoint you, but some are interested in the level of system used to make these observations. Let's start with imaging. The soundstage presentation of the F-01 is impressively good. In real music, we aren't surprised that there's a soundstage because there often is a stage, and the performers are distributed on it. We can hear roughly where the performers are. With stereo reproduction, we can create a virtual stage, which is done using phase information captured by the microphones. The interesting thing is that better amplifiers do a better job of generating stage width and central images, and especially stage depth. The F-01 is outstanding in these regards. On Dry Martini Jazz by the West Side Jazz Quartet, we heard a stage depth and width very reminiscent of a jazz club. Similarly, on the album Bach, Telemann, Albioni Concerti with the ensemble mask, my notes say, big, airy image with great depth. The other thing that makes this kind of imaging work well is the ability to do what we call instrumental separation. Ideally, you want to hear each performer or groups of performer, like the first violins, playing their distinct lines. In live performances, you can often do this to a remarkable degree, and it's something many audio systems struggle with. The F-01 excels at teasing out individual performances. For example, on the John Sermon album Words Unspoken, drums, vibraphone, guitar, and sax all have a sense of air around them, appearing to occupy their own positions with rich detail that makes it easy to follow along. I've only heard the F-01 equaled in imaging by the big block Mono A amps, which, maybe unsurprisingly, are also Class A and 3 times the price. I know some of you lose your minds when we review expensive gear, but it's hard to know what is possible and what is just an endemic limitation of the technology if you don't explore the boundaries. Next up, let's talk about dynamics. Here's the surprise, at least for me. The dynamics of the F-01 are also impressive. As we've noted, a link is in the description, dynamic performance is one of the 6 big remaining frontiers separating reproduced music from the real thing. The F-01 doesn't completely solve the problem, but dynamics with this amp are of a high order. Blues guitarist Ainsley Lister's recording Along for the Ride has guitar licks that just jump out of the speakers as they do with real electric guitar. The kick drum on this album also has believable punch, which lends a desirable drive to the music. The impressive thing about the F-01's dynamics is that they seem unforced. There isn't telltale overshoot on transients that suggests the F-01 is out of control or straining. And the F-01 returns to silence as well as it swings into action. This amp delivers real dynamics, not some aggressive imitation. Then we should talk about voicing. I think it's somewhat weird to use amplifiers to address tonal balance problems in recordings or the rest of an audio system, but some listeners feel forced in this direction. In any event, I don't think the F-01 is the amp for literal frequency response tone shaping. But the F-01 does have, or lack, depending on your perspective, 2 voicing characteristics that you should know about. First of all, the bass is very well controlled, but still warm and full. It isn't tight and dry, as with some Class D amps. It isn't loose and rich, as with some old-style tube amps. You could want any of those character elements, of course. I'll say that the bass of the F-01 calls less attention to itself than some other amps. And if you notice it, I think it will be in noticing how the music sound is believable, not thinking, oh, the amp is doing such and such. In the treble, I think some of you who are accustomed to more conventional amps would view the F-01 as slightly dark or with very slightly diminished treble. My listening suggests a different conclusion. The F-01 has lower treble distortion than many amps and thus sounds less bright. You can tell this because the definition of treble tones is actually better on the F-01 on good recordings. The reduced sense of brightness is the lack of attention-attracting edge and distortion. And on bright recordings, which some pop music producers and some classical engineers seem mysteriously to favor, the F-01 doesn't hold back. Ugly is still ugly, though slightly more tolerable. Then we have coherence. I want to wrap up these comments on sound quality with what may be the most important element, coherence. If you want an amp that really draws you into the music, you want an amp where the characteristics gel as a whole, no distracting discontinuities. In a way, I think coherence is the great strength of the F-01. It combines natural tonality with spaciousness and dynamic drive in a way that fits together, because it's how real music sounds. I noticed this on several albums I played, but I have to mention Gregory Porter's Liquid Spirit. The track, Hey Laura, is a simple gem of a ballad, and with the F-01 I simply noted emotion with an exclamation point. Enough said. We should also talk about something I've labeled magnitude. I want to put the imaging, dynamics, voicing, and coherence elements in context. In our magnitude and significance matrix, the qualities of the F-01 are in the upper right area of quadrant 4. These qualities are close to obvious, and their effect is in the upgrade zone for many if the supporting equipment is up to snuff. Now, while we're on the topic of magnitude, I should mention the available PS01F external power supply. Basically, for around $5,000, you can increase the capacitance and isolation of the preamp power supply in the F-01. Esoteric has already attended to this in the basic amp design, but both the preamp and the power amp normally use, for example, a common power transformer. Esoteric clearly sees the F-01 as a platform for a very high-end system, but realized that not everyone wants to take things to the nth degree. So the PS01F is an option. As we say, you have to judge value because only you know your economic situation. But I will say the PS01F makes a positive difference. Where I found the PS01F box to change the sound of the F-01 was, interestingly, by supercharging the already excellent imaging. Images with the external power supply seem perhaps 10% wider and deeper. Perhaps just as important, images seemed less connected to the speakers. There's even more air around the performers. Since the F-01 itself doesn't have any obvious sonic problems, other than max power output, the provision of an upgrade path that makes a point of sonic excellence excellenter seems wise to me. Presumably, if you invested in the F-01, it would be in part because its superb imaging was attractive, so you're someone who cares a lot about imaging. We should briefly touch on features. There are 3 XLR and 3 single-ended line inputs. I perhaps glossed over it, but a moving magnet and moving coil phono preamp is also included. Bass, mid-range, and treble controls are part of the package, and these are defeatable. There's a preamp output, and you can drive both the internal amplifier and an external amplifier in parallel if needed. A headphone amplifier with single-ended and balanced connections is included, with 600 milliwatts at 32 ohms output. Preamp gain and headphone gain are adjustable to minimize noise for your given inputs. You can also set different inputs to have different output levels so that the source switching doesn't lead to large variations in volume. The remote is a custom design that operates the F-01 and on the reverse side can operate an Esoteric disc player. This simplifies the buttons on each side. I'm perhaps too focused on the haptics of volume controls, though in my defense, this is the control you use approximately 90% of the time you're operating the remote. For right-handed people, the Esoteric remote's up-down toggle falls nicely to hand. The operation of the level in 0.1 dB steps is perhaps a bit fine, although if you long press the up or down button, it moves faster. An actual volume knob on the remote or a copy of the Cambridge toggle and on-unit display would be better, but these are rare implementations. I think a company with Esoteric's attention to detail could do it, and at this price point, it would make sense. The F-01 runs warm, as Class A amps are designed to do. But since the heat sinks are internal to the casework, you really don't notice this. Other than that, the fit and finish of the F-01 is exemplary. Everything feels solid, and indeed apparently is. The F-01 weighs 71 pounds. All right, let's summarize. The Esoteric F-01 is impressively true to the absolute sound in our observational testing. The imaging and dynamics are the equal of amplifiers priced much higher, assuming you have speakers with sufficient sensitivity. Fortunately, sufficient sensitivity just means typical cone-type speaker levels. With something like our reference per listen S7T or Magico A5, you get the benefits of extreme engineering and the ability to deliver dynamics in the 104 to 107 dB range. If you like horns, you can probably get stupid. People at the high end may assume they need more power, but after living with the F-01, we'd suggest at least reconsidering and checking this one out. I hope you've enjoyed this review of the Esoteric F-01 integrated amplifier. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again soon.